Talk 1400 KFRU is proud to present the KFRU Heritage Series. It's a 1-hour perspective on the events and the people whose lives have contributed to the heritage of Boone County. Listen each Sunday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The KFRU Heritage Series from News Talk 1400 KFRU.
Heritage Show has had many different backgrounds of its guests, and we've talked sometimes about a topic that we're going to talk more about in this particular segment. I'm trying to figure out how to set this up as we have someone who you might best know as a realtor in town, or you may know him from church activities or some other activities, but I think of him as the topic that we'll talk about today, maybe real estate. And it's one that has come up a couple of times in the Heritage Shows when we've had others on, but never really focused on it like I anticipate today when we talk to Dave Babel. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good.
All right. Let's talk. Let's start with real estate. Your connection with real estate in this town is through which real estate agencies?
Well, currently, our son and Carol and I own Reese and Nichols, Mid-Missouri, and that's the agency that we own and run.
Now, you've had connections with Plaza Real Estate?
That's correct. And actually, we farmed, Denny Douglas and I farmed Plaza Real Estate quite a number of years ago. And then not too terribly long ago, about 2.5 years ago, Reese and Nichols bought Plaza Real Estate. And at that time, Paul Land bought the name Plaza Real Estate for his commercial division. And we were a part of Reese and Nichols, which John Gage owned. And then a little over a year ago, December of year before last, John came in and made us an offer we couldn't refuse, and we, as a family, purchased Reese and Nichols, Mid-Missouri.
I expect to talk more about what brought your family here and where you're from and things of that nature, but I wanted to talk about real estate for a while. When you came to Columbia, you came to school here and were a couple of years at the University of Missouri. Did you stay here right after that?
Yes.
Did you stay here and get involved immediately on property and real estate?
No, actually stayed here and started out in the insurance business. And then, and that was in 1960. And then in 1980, we bought the Babel, we bought the George Peak Agency and changed the name to Babel Peak, and then had both insurance and real estate.
So that started in 1980, about
yes,
1980.
Correct.
So that's a long enough time ago that things have changed just a bit in town since 1980.
Yes,
do you remember the first house that you sold or were involved in the sale?
I can't say that I really do. I remember, though, at the time that it was a rather hard time to go in the real estate business, but I bought the George Peak Agency mainly for the insurance business.
Yeah.
And then got more interested in the real estate business. At that time, the interest rates were around 15%.
See, I can remember paying attention to interest rates in the 70s, I guess, when I first started paying attention to it. And that would be the Jimmy Carter years and led up then to Ronald Reagan being elected. And the reason I bring that up is it all seems tied in with the national feeling of what was going on. But 15%, what would have been a good rate? 15% a good rate then? Or were people getting maybe 12, 13% and thinking they were getting a deal?
Well, yes, some people were, but most of the houses at that point really were sold by people that could carry their mortgages back and give them a much better deal, like 8 or 10%.
Wow. But, I mean, during the 70s, though, I think the percentage rate was 15% or higher at times, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
That's just incredible. People that have those memories, I don't know whether they remember those times and are saying 3, 4, 5%, which would be pretty common now, is just beyond their belief, or if they're spoiled and say, gosh, it should be 2% now.
Well, and part of my problem during that period was I was active in a bank here in town as a shareholder, and I had financed some of my stock. And so the interest rate just kept going up on that, and that got rather heavy there for a while.
Of course, at the same time that the interest rates were high on the mortgages, the interest rate was pretty high on my passbook savings account or on my other accounts. So you'd trade a nice interest on investments for interest that you might have on a loan.
Very true.
So when you think of the real estate market there in the early 80s, is it much different than it is now?
Well, yes, quite a bit different. And, of course, for me, very different because I started out in the residential market and now for a number of years have been in the commercial market, which I enjoy more. My son does the residential, I do the commercial. But, goodness.
What areas of the town were like the hot areas 30 years ago when we're talking early 80s?
Well, to give you an idea, Hulen Lake was very hot at the time. I can remember when I came to school here, Hulen Lake was way out, seemed like, in the country, and we went out there to go swimming. So probably that was the area that I remember most.
It's hard to put in. I mean, it's easy now to think of Thornbrook, even Bluff Creek, up north. I can't think of Vanderveen and those areas now as being relatively new additions. But I can't think in the 80s new additions or new subdivisions where they were popping up.
Well, they were popping up just west on Broadway, which now is... and, of course, that was the edge of town when I came to Columbia. And mainly they were going, of course, west at that point, and that was the growth area.
Yeah, I can't think of any were people being attracted to that when they were thinking about buying? Is that are we much different today as far as our tastes are concerned, or I suppose it just varies as much as it does. Some people like to live close to downtown. Some people like to live in the new parts of town.
Actually, downtown at that time was not nearly as popular for living as it has become more recently.
Yeah. It has now. Of course, now living down there, mostly the students. What was student housing? Was the university was a lot smaller even 20, 25, 30 years ago than it is right now. We think now is the big demand of student housing that is leading to all of these apartments that are popping up, many of them downtown, some of them controversial, which people are well aware of. But what was student housing like in the real estate market?
Well, when I came to school, of course, student housing, I was able to have a small room in a large house that was about 2 blocks from campus. And that's where a lot of us lived if we didn't live on campus. And then, of course, the student housing has, like I say, changed significantly. Interestingly enough, that particular house is still there and has apartments for students.
Do you know where it was? Where
Wilson.
it is? Wilson, East Campus.
Yes.
East Campus, what it is. It's funny because I lived in a house right on College, and I can't, just east of Paquin Towers, in the basement of a house there when I came to the university here. And so I know that neighborhood quite well, but those houses still exist, and they've been apartments then for students for a really long time.
Yes. Yeah, you mentioned you lived in the basement. Actually, I did in this house in Wilson, and could tell I woke up one morning and my shoes were floating, and they moved me up to the second floor at that point.
Well, I'm not trying to compete with your story, but I've got a story also. I did not get shoes floating, but what I had was hot water that was coming down from the pipes above me, sprinkling me with hot water, and the meager possessions I had at that point in time, I didn't get moved. I think what they did was they just patched the pipes or something like that and stayed down there, but it was quite an experience. Dave Babel is our guest on the Heritage Show on KFRU. How well do you remember what we talked about, interest rates and mortgage rates and things of that nature, but houses at that point in time, can you give us a range of what most houses were going for then?
Well, to give you an idea, we built a house on Ridgemont Court, and that would have been like in in the 60s, the mid to late 60s, and we had a mortgage rate at that point, which was fantastic, at about 4%. And then we had we put about $18,000 in that house, which we thought was an awfully nice house.
In the early 60s.
Correct.
By the 80s, what were you looking at as far as people's tastes were concerned and when you were first in real estate?
Well, at that point, the house like the one that we had was more like 30 or 40, and the prices were going up significantly. And then today, that house with the square footage it had is probably selling in the area of 150 to 200.
Yeah. When you think of, also of I can't remember what the population was of Columbia back at that point in time, and I know that the population at the school was really low. The areas that were old and settled that we think of that way now haven't changed. You can tell me whether this is true or not. The Grasslands, the old Southwest, those areas there, even East Campus, I don't think the identity, has it changed much, in your opinion, over the last 30 years? 40 years?
It really hasn't. And, of course, Broadway going west, where you had the big, nice homes, and that has always been pretty nice, in my opinion, and stayed that way.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, as you think of that area now, as it just keeps on moving out, and the transition, the evolution of a neighborhood, it takes on a different identity many times, but then some neighborhoods are able to grab a hold of an identity like the Grasslands or others and keep that for a long time.
Yes. Now, and that's terrific.
Let's talk about commercial real estate for just a second. When you think of the growth of the community in the ways of, I can remember when like Columbia Mall was built or anything. Do you have memories of when that area was changing and when it became what it is now, and when that happened?
Well, of course, the Columbia Mall Parkade area was a drive-in, movie drive-in, where you could go to the movies, and that was developed by Herb Jeans, if that name rings a bell.
It does not. I do not know that name.
Herb was a mayor at one time, but he developed that area, and that was really big time because everything else was downtown until that came along.
When was it, like, I can remember Biscayne Mall, which used to have theaters out there. I can remember the Parkade Center when it used to have the Flaming Pit or whatever was out there, and J.C. Penney and some of those stores. What was the time frame? Were they all close together in when they were just...
No, and in fact, when you said Columbia Mall, I was thinking Parkade Plaza.
Yeah, Parkade Plaza, which was the drive-in.
Well, yes, and was the first.
So Parkade was first.
Yes.
It had some good stores there. I mean, it had some anchor stores there.
Well, actually, Penny's was there, and had that was the place.
It was.
Yes.
So that was first. When did Biscayne Mall come along?
And then Biscayne Mall was the next, and I'm not sure date-wise, but the Columbia Mall I had a little involvement in real estate-wise because a director on our bank board with me sold the land that the Columbia Mall went on.
What time period are we talking there?
That would have been, probably in the, my time frame isn't real good, but in the 80s.
When you think of what was the thought from those in the banking industry of the risk that it was to build something like that? Well,
that was a little big for us, so we certainly didn't get involved in it. But you looked at it as a risk, but an opportunity. And usually, well, always, you required a very strong body to be involved in it.
Yeah, I can remember the Columbia Mall as being an attraction. It's like a magnet for people from a long ways away, or at least it seems like that. You can draw a circle, and you would think of the people that were drawn to the Columbia Mall because it was even though the Parkade Mall was there, it wasn't the same thing in the mind of those of us who lived an hour away.
Well, and that reminds me of this year around Christmas time. Our office is right out by the Columbia Mall. Mm-hmm. And the traffic this year around Christmas time, the shopping before, during, and after was just really something else.
Do you remember the Stadium Boulevard, what it was like when it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago?
Well,
or so?
I remember when there was no Stadium Boulevard, and of course it has certainly helped the traffic problem tremendously.
So what was obviously nothing was out there then. If
No.
There was no Stadium Boulevard. Was it a 2-lane road, kind of a country type road?
As I remember it, yes, and we just didn't have a road going where Stadium Boulevard is now.
You know, any time that there is road construction or road widening, or let's put a road here, or let's do infrastructure because we're anticipating development, there's this agonizing debate about it in any community. Columbia, I don't think, is much different than any other community. Do you recall any of that? People saying, "Oh, this is going to lead to horribleness," or this is going to be the best thing that we can ever imagine." Were there those kinds of debates?
Yes, and I think we go through those kinds of debates on everything like this. Any change.
But they work out.
Yes. Yeah, well, as you look
Many
at
of
it
them.
today, what would we have done with what would we be doing without it?
Yeah, it's like a outer inner loop now, and I know people are talking about maybe putting another loop around that area. But Stadium, when it gets extended past 63 on the other side of town over to I-70, is going to be another interesting development, which has already gone through much debate.
Well, yes, and that's, in my opinion, certainly going to help happen and will be a great asset for the high school that is going to be, being built and going to be a fine high school.
It'll be like 270 around St. Louis or 435 around Kansas City or something like that. That's what we're looking at, basically.
That's right, on a smaller scale.
Dave Babel is our guest. We're going to talk more with him when we come back. You're listening to The Heritage Show on KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400, KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
Heritage Show that's on KFRU has brought in a lot of people to talk to. I know Dave Babel because we both are members of Missouri United Methodist Church, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that. That's been completely free of any controversy downtown also, right? You don't want me to bring that up. I know you don't. But he's board of trustees. I think you're the chair of that, are you not? I have
Correct.
to find so he can also talk about downtown churches and the challenges that they face, and maybe we will before this time is over. But I like talking about real estate because it really is such an important part of a community. I mean, the realtors, I think, have they know a community as well as anybody because of the way that they work with people. Would you agree with that?
Actually, we're required to because people are interested in schools and where they're located, and of course, Columbia has such a great school system that obviously is a great draw to people. But you're expected to know different areas of the town when they say they want this type of house or that type of house, and where are these generally found, and the price ranges, etc.
So you were talking about how insurance companies, how often were insurance companies or realty companies combined or together?
Well, as far as agencies are concerned, they were combined quite a bit back, when I first went in the business. But however, I went into just the insurance business and then bought the agency so that I had insurance and real estate. In fact, George Peak had insurance, real estate, and a loan company.
Really?
Yes, and so that was not uncommon at all.
Have they been separated out because of rules and regulations, or just do people no longer think of putting them together?
Mainly, I think, or at least in my case, the problem was that I couldn't keep up with everything that was going on in the insurance business and everything that was going on in the real estate business too. And so I sold the insurance part of the agency and concentrated on the real estate, because at that time it had gotten to where the insurance business, you couldn't call and get a hold of David Lyle in the home office and talk to him. It was done differently, and I missed that, where real estate was more person to person.
Insurance, were you handling? Because when I think of insurance, people think now of shelter insurance, but it wasn't shelter insurance at that time. Was it MFA insurance?
Yes.
And then State Farm Insurance has been a part of this community, I think, for quite a while.
It has.
So those are the huge insurance companies. And then Sylvia Insurance came along through there also. Are there other insurance companies that I missed here that agents were working with?
Well, the Columbia Insurance Group
that's true.
here in Columbia. And I can't think of any other sizable insurance companies that are right here.
I need to give this side thing just as an own personal little thing that I can't help but thinking as we're talking about this. It had nothing to do with insurance, but real estate. The first thing I ever wrote that showed up on a radio station was KFRU when it was down the street across from, next to Jack's Gourmet Restaurant and across from Westlake, which wasn't there at that time, I don't think. But I was doing an intern at the University of Missouri, and so I'd spent a few hours each week mostly writing out by hand our program logs, which are now generated automatically. But I was asked one day, could you come up with like a short little line that we could use as a sponsor to throw in during the day? So the first thing I ever wrote that actually appeared on radio, and I didn't voice it, was, when you need a house, sir, go to Glauser. It was horrible, but I can still remember that. And so I guess it was Glauser Real Estate at that point in time.
Yes, Lou and Marion Glauser, and they were very good friends.
It was a horrible thing, but they used it for a while, and I thought, well, that is pretty cool. This job's not as hard as I thought it was. So, but you knew them? Were they a long time? The Glauser isn't part of this scene anymore.
No, but they were very active in real estate and in the statewide real estate organization. Lou is still living here in Columbia, and in fact, our grandson, one of our grandsons, married Lou Glauser's granddaughter.
I see. Well, that's pretty cool. When you think of there seem to be a lot of real estate agents, but I suppose that they are affected by the economic times. So we probably lost some over the last half dozen years. But was that as an attractive job in the early 80s and through the 80s? Did it become attractive in 90s? Is that what led to the thought that there were a lot of real estate agents in this town, or is that a misconception that those of us not in the business have?
Well, I think the real estate business has always been real attractive to people, but it just has changed a great deal. And as Columbia's grown, then the number of agents have grown. And what you find is that a certain number of agents, when things get really tough, just cannot survive. And then we have a certain number of agents that do real estate more or less part-time.
Yeah.
So maybe there seem to be more real estate people that than there are that are real active.
I see. I understand what you're saying. You've given me a list here of things that you have either developed or owned or co-owned. Some of these are pretty impressive, like the Strollway Center. How much of that history? I think of how it was redone. I think it was Tom Atkins. I mean, he's redone that within it's probably more years than I can remember right now, but that's a beautiful place. But that was a certain downtown attraction that really had a feel about it at a certain time. When you were involved in that, or your memories of the Strollway Center?
Well, I had a partner, Cal Pfeiffer. He and I owned the Strollway Center, and that was before Tom bought it and redid it. And he has done a super job there at the Strollway Center. But it was also at a time when downtown properties, actually the Parkade Plaza had come along, and those type of business were going out of town. Well, not out of town.
I understand
but,
what you mean. Not downtown.
Not downtown, yes. Out of downtown. And it was an interesting property to own, and I'm glad to see that it has been renovated the way Tom did it.
What kind of stores do you remember being down there?
We had a barber shop, and there was a call center on the second floor. We had a restaurant downstairs. There was a clothing, much like is there now on the corner, where you had sporting goods and so forth. I'm trying to remember, we had quite a few offices upstairs that different people had.
Yeah. Long before you were involved with that, I think we've learned from one of our other Heritage Show episodes with a former co-owner of Booch's that Booch's used to be somewhere up on a second or third floor, somewhere down there.
Gosh, I don't remember that.
Yeah, I mean, it predated anybody's time.
Even predated me.
Yeah, but I can remember, I'm pretty sure that I can remember Jerry Deathrow saying that, and he said it was up on, and it was a place where only men were allowed to go, I think, but I don't remember, but the pool tables were up there. Other things, where's Hillshire Estate subdivision?
Well, that's one of the subdivisions north of town that we helped develop. A friend of mine owned the land, and Andy and I, my son, helped him sell lots and houses there.
Is it a long way north of I-70?
Not a long way. Actually, if you go up what I call Old 63 at this point, and things have changed up there a little, but if you go on past the new development and then go left, it's back in that area.
Okay. One of the other names that I see on this list here, Doc and Eddie's Restaurant. Man, that brings back some. I mean, people now think Doc and Norm, but Doc and Eddie's. I can't remember where Doc and Eddie's was, but I still remember it. It's not been that long ago when Doc and Eddie's was here.
Well, actually, it's between where our office is now and the motel there. It's a building that is no longer a restaurant.
I can't think what is there then.
It's several businesses. Johnson Company, which is the firm that owns and manages that area, their offices are there.
When you think about those times and when you think about these places and your involvement with them, what are your thoughts? What do you think about how others are now in owning these, or they don't exist anymore, or there are others at their stage in life that are doing what you were doing in your stage in life 30 and 40 years ago?
Well, it was an opportunity, and I had a partner in that, a good friend. And then where the motel is now, we built the Budgetel Motel. And that was where there used to be the Wet Willie's slide that people would go out and enjoy. And I remember...
that is a lot. You see that from the interstate?
Yes.
On the west side of town.
Correct.
There was a slide out there, wasn't there?
Yes. Right.
I never went down that slide, but I can remember that.
I never went down
it. It was Budgetel. It's now La Quinta. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct.
Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, you're bringing that back. I think a lot of people are going to think of that slide. What else? Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Well, but as far as seeing people doing development, of course, I'm a pro-development person. And
are you surprised that the development has occurred like it has in certain places? Did you just say, "Oh, I never imagined that I would live to see this," or "I wouldn't ever imagine that that's the way that would have gone"?
Yes.
So what places surprise you?
Well, actually, right now where we were talking about, that was sort of a surprising place when it developed at the time. I guess the biggest, I would have to say, surprise, and where some of the biggest development is going on right now is south of town. as commercial. The commercial development down there is just terrific.
Are you talking in the Peachtree area, or
Yes.
it's beyond that now?
Well,
because that area is already developed.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Peachtree and east of there.
Yeah,
where
along
you have
Grindstone.
Yes.
It's hard to. Maybe I'm among the few, or just a certain segment of the population that has this problem more so than people who are developers and can imagine things. But I was trying to discuss with my daughter a few weeks ago when we were out at Fairview and West Broadway and looking where the Hy-Vee is and a Walmart there and all of that's developed there. I was trying to remember, and it's not been that many years ago, what was there prior to those things being there. Do you ever say, well, I can't remember what was there? It's changed.
Well, where Hy-Vee is, there was a rather large lake located there.
I do remember that now.
And on that corner, and so it was country.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
It was wide open, but it changes. Do you ever find yourself driving by someplace and saying, I can't remember what was there? It's just been a few years ago.
Yes, I do.
Where do you think the hot growth is going to occur? I know this is the Heritage Show, and so we talk about heritage, but when you think of growth, will it be up near where the new high school and soon to be a new elementary school in that area? Are we tapped out in certain other directions? I'm talking residential, I think, more than anything else.
Yes, well, residential-wise, yes. Yeah, a friend of mine, in fact, my running buddy, we run Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. He was a school teacher, and one of his first jobs was at Rockbridge High School. And when Rockbridge came along, everybody said, well, that is way out in the country. And, of course, there was just a 2-lane road going out to it. So, and you see what has happened, and schools bring residential development.
Let me pick your brain about something else, Dave, before we take a break, and then we'll come back and probably talk about something other than real estate. Help us understand, those of us who are not in the development business or the purchasing and land business, when we see certain things in town, they could be close to downtown. I could think of a couple of that I could mention right now, and they sit idle or they're not developed. What is the holdup on that, or what is the thinking? And I know you just anticipate because you're not involved in what I'm asking about or specific things, but can you help us understand it from a different perspective as to why things don't get developed when there seem to be, from another point of view, a perfect place to develop something?
Yes. One reason is the cost of land, of course, and being able to buy the land for what some people are asking for it and make it work. Another thing is that once you have a building there, sometimes to get it full or to get it started, if you would, we have to reduce the price to get people in and make it attractive, and not every owner of a building is willing to do that. And then you get the situation where some buildings are placed where maybe they shouldn't have been placed.
Right. I understand. If somebody owns a property, for example, like if somebody owns where the old Osco drugstore is, right there, which seems to be, many people would say, well, I would do this, or why don't they do that? Of course, that is owned by a very wealthy family that could do anything they want to with that. But there are considerations that they have. I always try to see it from a different point of view and say, well, there's reasons that something isn't there now.
Well, of course, that was a small shopping area
Yes, it was.
did quite well at one time, and then has not been developed since it became vacant, basically. I think it all depends on the owner's desire to do something in that area. And, that area quite possibly now, with all of the students coming, not all of them, but a lot of them, into apartments downtown, that area certainly you could see that developed, in my opinion, in the next several years.
Well, it would be interesting to see whether you're one of the richest persons in the country or an entrepreneur who just wants to take a risk. Either extreme doesn't want to fail, doesn't want to put something that won't survive. I think that would probably be one of the toughest things to deal with is to say, well, I thought this was going to work.
Right.
So I could understand even very rich people saying, I want to make sure that what I put here is going to work. So that's the consideration that goes into it also.
Yes, it certainly is.
And then we all know of places that have gone through a lot of different identities on certain corners that people thought it'd be a great place to do something, but the right, I guess an entrepreneur, a developer would always say, I just got to find the right thing and it's going to work there.
Yes, man, that's the key. And knowing what the right thing is not that easy.
Yeah, it is not, even for very rich people. Dave Babel is our guest. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll have another short segment. We'll change our tune and perhaps talk about other topics that we haven't covered. Well, obviously, we'll talk about topics we haven't covered so far, but we've got a short segment left of our Heritage Show. Thanks for listening this morning. This is News Talk 1400 KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series on News Talk 1400 KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
We're enjoying going all around town and talking about development, talking about real estate, and a little bit of insurance with Dave Babel, who you moved to the community when?
Well, I actually came to school here back in 1957.
What an interesting time to come to Columbia.
Yes.
Columbia
was different then.
It was. So what sticks in your mind as favorite things or places that you were doing when you were a student and you came here?
Well, Hewlands Lake was one of the places we really enjoyed going to visit. And then...
Did it not have houses around it at that time?
No. It was... there was a veterinarian that owned it, and he would... you would drive up, and he would take your, I don't remember what it was, quarter, whatever, and you were allowed to swim there.
It was a private lake, a recreation lake then.
Right. Dr. Hewlin was his name, and everybody said that he was one fellow that could get out of the truck before it even stopped. He moved so fast.
That's pretty cool. Any other places that you thought of that you would hang out at? Or?
Well, of course, on campus, and at that point, we stayed fairly close to campus. A friend of mine worked at the Yacht Club, which was east of town.
I've heard of that, but I don't know anything about the Yacht Club.
Yeah, well, it was a bar and grill, and quite popular at the time. And then right across from Jesse Hall, of course, was the
shack,
very frequented shack.
Yeah. When you are the chairman of the trustees at Missouri United Methodist Church, which is the big church downtown, what challenges do you see, or what history do you feel when you think about your connection with that church?
Well, we searched for churches, Carol and I, and she belonged to the Christian church. I belonged to the Methodist Church, Leadwood Methodist Church, and we decided to join the Methodist Church there, Missouri United Methodist, in 1960, and have been members ever since. So we've seen a lot of changes. One of the big challenges, naturally, is a challenge that downtown Columbia has, and that's parking.
Yeah.
But the church has been a wonderful place and has grown, as you know, and with the addition. But people seem not to mind to drive a ways because we don't have that much of our congregation at this point that really lives downtown. We're pursuing that with the students being readily available and trying to entice them.
That church was built to be a cathedral-type presence, not only in the town, as I understand it, but also sort of in the state for Methodists.
That's correct. A lot of Methodists donated money for that church because of the University of Missouri and it being right there and being available to the students.
Did you feel like when you came in 1960 or late 50s and was a student that was a church that seemed to be almost, it's not on campus, but almost campus-like?
Yes, very, very welcoming at that point. interesting thing is that Carol and I said that we would, at that point, the community as a whole was not real welcoming to students necessarily. And so one of the comments we made at one time is, gosh, we'd never live in Columbia when we graduated. And boy,
that's a wrong prediction.
Yes,
you do one wrong prediction. Yeah.
And we love it.
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge of that church physically? The church itself. I don't know. It's what, 70 years old, maybe 80 years old.
Well,
90.
Not more like 90.
90.
Yes, and.
Trustees look at the upkeep of a church. What takes most of your concern?
Well, keeping it in good shape as far as the sanctuary, the main original church, is concerned. That is a job every day, quite frankly. The new Christian Life Center, of course, is not old enough to have some of those problems. We've been fortunate here again that a lot of the people that have belonged to that church have donated money to keep it in good shape. And so we have a Heritage Foundation where we receive interest to take care of the church, and that really makes a big difference.
It's one of the beautiful parts of downtown. There are several churches downtown. We could talk about the First Christian Church, the Episcopal Church, the Baptist Church. So hopefully that nucleus of churches will always have a connection downtown, because I think it's a great part of the downtown, any nice downtown like that.
It is, and all the churches, the Presbyterian, et cetera, churches downtown really take care of their churches and their congregations.
I want to mention Second Baptist also, which we've talked about in previous Heritage shows. Well, Dave Babel, I'm glad we got you scheduled. Thanks for taking the time to come in and visit with us. Appreciate
Thanks for having me.
Dave Babel has been our guest, and you've been listening to the Heritage Show. This is KFRU.
You've been listening to the KFRU Heritage Series, celebrating our history and heritage of Columbia and Boone County. Listen each Sunday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The KFRU Heritage Series. News Talk 1400 KFRU.